Welcome. My name is Marjorie Jean-Pierre, and I'm a Senior Director at the United States Energy Association. We are pleased that you're able to join us for our Fireside Chat, Climate Change Adaptation Strategies for Electric Utilities in Arid and Semi-Arid Regions. This program is part of the Advancing Modern Power Through Utility Partnerships AmpUp program, managed by the U.S. Energy Association and financed by the U.S. Agency for International Development. For those of you new to USDA, our goal is to convene, educate, and provide a non-participant forum for the energy industry. Internationally, USDA supports energy development by expanding access to safe, affordable, and sustainable energy in partnership with the U.S. government. For over 30 years, USDA has had the opportunity to collaborate with the U.S. Agency for International Development to provide capacity building assistance to our overseas partners for increased energy security and access by developing and conducting capacity building programs that encourage the sharing of global best practices and exposure to latest developments, including private sector engagement, market-based approaches to utility operations and management, implementation of regulations, and environmental safeguards. The U.S. Energy Association, in collaboration with a consortium of highly skilled organizations, will be managing an initiative with USAID, which is the Advancing Modern Power Through Utility Partnerships AmpUp program. The consortium is comprised of Arizona State University, MK Advisors, NRECA International, and Segura Consulting. AmpUp was developed to introduce an innovative performance improvement model centered around peer-to-peer relationships and strong practitioner and stakeholder networks. The program will capitalize on the vast experiences and knowledge of diverse consortium, as well as domestic and international energy sector experts, to offer an unparalleled network of utility and energy sector expertise to support the global energy transition towards the net zero goals of the participating overseas partners involved in AmpUp. The consortium will work in collaboration with USAID and our overseas partners to identify long and short-term goals for country utility operations that encourage and support workforce development and identify new technology innovations to deploy effective climate solutions. This webinar is being led by Arizona State University and is presented under the AmpUp Technology Webinar Series. The series will highlight current energy issues being discussed and implemented globally and will be led by each AmpUp consortium member. This webinar is the second in a three-part series on climate risk management, and we hope you will continue to join us for our other webinars. As utilities are faced with ever-increasing changes to their environment due to climate change and unusual weather patterns, they are met with challenges to ensure they provide reliable power. This challenge is increased for those utilities in developing countries without access to equipment surpluses and flexible financial capital. This fireside chat will highlight how the presenters' utilities have and are adapting to climate change-related risks with a focus on power systems in semi-arid and arid regions, as they are increased risk due to extreme heat, wildfires, flash flooding, and drought. Again, thank you for attending, and I now have the pleasure of introducing from USAID, Wei-Ming Chen, Technical Advisor for the Center for Environment, Energy, and Infrastructure for the Bureau for Development, Democracy, and Innovation, DDI, from U.S. Agency for International Development. Wei-Ming, thank you for joining us.
Hi, good morning, afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us today to learn about utilities' actions in response to climate change impacts on arid and semi-arid regions. Today, we are going to unpack how for utilities from different regions evaluate risks to make electrical infrastructure, operations, and the surface more resilient. More frequent floods, droughts, severe wildfires, and heat waves underscore the need for business to become more resilient to the impacts of climate change. With shifts in technologies, markets, and regulation, utilities face new risks and opportunities as they position themselves for a low-carbon future. Climate change is likely to have significant impacts on the utility sector, particularly in arid and semi-arid regions. Two major impact areas are water availability and increasing energy demand. Water shortage already occur in arid and semi-arid regions, and the climate change is expected to exacerbate this problem. Climate models predict that these regions will face more frequent and severe impact. Drinking water availability for the utility sectors. This can have an impact on utilities' ability to generate electricity, as well as the availability of water for other purposes such as agriculture and domestic consumption. Regarding energy demand, as temperature rises, so does the demand for cooling, putting a strain on the utility sector. High temperatures in arid regions can make it difficult to maintain the efficiency of power generation and transmission infrastructure, resulting in power outages and reduced service reliability. In today's section, we look forward to learning from the experiences of utilities from Pakistan, Kenya, and California and Arizona. Today's webinar is brought to you by USAID's Advancing Modern Power Through Utility Partnership, or AmpUp program. AmpUp brings together an impressive team across 5 international organizations to tap into the incredible talents of the U.S. energy sector and the global partners. Through each of the AmpUp consortium member organizations, we have access to a robust network with vast experience in supporting the global energy transition that is working on self-shared energy sector challenges in cooperation with international counterparts. Please stay tuned for more upcoming technical webinars from the AmpUp program in the coming months. I would like to thank ASU, thank ASU and the USEA for organizing today's webinars. I will pass the floor back to Marjorie to continue with today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wei Ming, for your insightful remarks, and we thank USAID for your continued support. I was remiss in not mentioning earlier that this webinar is being recorded, so that can be posted on our AmpUp page on our USDA page. It'll also allow us to send a link with some additional documents that we be provided as part of this webinar. I am now pleased to introduce Elena Von Hove, Director of Global Energy Access, Arizona State University, who will introduce our presenters and moderate our fireside chat. Elena, it's all yours.
Great, thank you, Marjorie. It's my privilege to moderate today's webinar on climate adaptation of electric utilities in arid and semi-arid regions. The goal for today's webinar is to share how arid regions are facing unique challenges in adapting in comparison to other regions. We will begin the first 25 minutes with pre-prepared questions. Then during the rest of the webinar, we'll open up questions from the audience. Please enter your question in the chat at any time. The Q&A has been disabled. With us today, we have 4 speakers representing semi-arid and arid regions of the world. Speakers, you may turn on your video now. So first we have Zehra Anik, the former Director of Sustainability and ESG at K Electric. She was a part of KE for the last 14 years, having just transitioned out in March. Zehra spearheaded KE's green energy transition plans and played a pivotal role in the distribution climate resilient infrastructure projects, including initiating award-winning climate equity projects. KE is the largest and only vertically integrated privatized power utility in Pakistan KE primarily serves Karachi, which is the fourth largest city in the world, and has a customer base of more than 3.4 million customers. Next, we have Roderick Dela Cruz of Southern California Edison in the United States. Roderick is a senior manager responsible for earthquake resiliency and climate adaptation of SCE's electrical infrastructure. He has over 30 years of experience combined in civil and structural engineering, earthquake resiliency, dam safety management, and climate adaptation in the US and in various countries in Southeast Asia. SCE is one of the largest electric utilities in the United States and a leader in the transformation of the electric power industry, focusing on opportunities in clean energy, efficient electrification, and powering a resilient future through adaptation. Next, we have Dr. Mutigi Mbe, the regional manager of Nairobi at Kenya Power and Lighting Company. Dr. Mbe has over 15 years of experience, primarily in the electricity sector in Kenya, but also in a number of other African countries. KPLC is the national distribution and retail power company in Kenya with a customer base of over 9 million. Kenya's national installed grid capacity stands over 3,000 megawatts, of which 78% is renewable energy. And finally, we have Tom Cooper of Salt River Project. Tom is SRP's Director of Corporate Strategy, Sustainability, and Economic Services. He has been in the electric utility industry for over 22 years, with experience on a wide range of topics, including finance, operations, load forecasting, strategy, sustainability, and economic development. SRP is one of the United States' largest public power utilities, serving power and water to over 2 million people in central Arizona. SRP was founded in 1903 as one of the first 5 US federal reclamation projects. Great. Well then, to kick off the discussion, let's begin with an open question to all of our speakers, which is, how has your utility been impacted by climate change? And what is your utility doing in response to this impact? Anyone, please feel free to start.
I can certainly jump in there and get it rolling. Certainly in Arizona, we're no stranger to very hot temperatures, occasionally hitting over 120 degrees. But what we're seeing in terms of climate change is specifically longer periods of high temperatures, more hours in the day, over 110, over 115, more days in the year. And that places additional stress on the system assets and, of course, on our customers. Drought continues to be a concern, and the combination of all this and others, we've got wildfire risk. And the other thing is summer brings a lot of very intense storms. And what we're seeing is, on occasion, more intense storms, more frequent storms, some very high wind shear that we're looking at, things that are easy to sort of look at in the macro sort of trends, but very difficult to predict in terms of where and exactly when and where, which poses some, I think, additional challenges. So I think that could tee it up pretty good from an Arizona perspective in terms of how we're being impacted.
Thank you, Tom. Let me share what's happening in California. So in California, 5-year average cost of 1 billion or more disaster events have increased to 10-fold over the past decade. Wildfire is the one that has severely affected utilities here in California because of the decreasing water levels in Colorado River, along with the declines of snowpacks that have contributed to longer wildfire season by an average of 3 months, resulting to almost 1,500% increase in burn areas. So what are we doing? So we have developed what we call a wildfire mitigation strategy, and we're basically investing billions of dollars since 2018 on how to mitigate risks associated with wildfire. We have installed almost 4,400 miles of covered conductor, almost 1,600 weather stations to be able to understand the implication of this in our system. We have completed 1.9 million trims and removals as part of vegetation management, and also installed 180 high definition cameras. In addition to that, we are proactive in really reimagining the grid of the future to be able to help in decarbonization. And at the same time, we also have performed what we call climate adaptation vulnerability assessment, where we are looking at vulnerability and system risks in the next 10, 20, and 50 years that will be affecting our system due to climate change.
Thank you. And thank you again for hosting us for having us in this webinar. Kenya is an African country, and for us in particular, our biggest challenge in terms of climate change has been drought. For the last 3-4 years, we have experienced persistent drought, which has led to our traditional source of energy, that is hydro, being depleted at a very fast. For example, currently we are only doing about 30% of our hydro capacity. And as a result of that, as a country, we passed the climate law in 2016, of course, guided by the Kyoto Protocol and other applicable international laws. And the energy sector, among other sectors, were assigned their contribution towards reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and other deliverables. In the country, we assigned our sector about energy sector that 6% target by the year 2025. And as such, it's something that we have done quite well. Like, for example, geothermal is one of the renewable resources in the country. Currently is doing half of our demand, whereas hydro has fallen from an high of 40 to almost 15%. Things like wind and solar that were practically not in the grid 6 years ago are now doing about almost 20% of the combined capacity. As a country, we also passed another law in 2019, the Energy Act 2019, to also spur growth in terms of investment in generation as well as retail segments. Last week, we also passed, we also added a tariff on electric mobility because we realized that almost 80% of our energy is renewable, which means that in terms of electric mobility, we will be using renewable energy. And it's a sector that is still very young in the country. But we believe with the new tariff and also the time of use tariff, we have never did before. We also just brought it on board last month. These are things that we believe will help us to grow in terms of the climate resilience, because we are not sure whether the rainfall patterns will go back to the 5-10 years ago levels. As a country, for example, we are the leading producer of geothermal in Africa, possibly number 7 in the world. And we are taking the same direction in terms of wind and solar. Solar is still our biggest potential currently. We are doing just 3%. We want to grow it possibly to 20%. Wind is about 14-15%. We also want to double it because the water level issues we are not sure about. And of course, there are other measures at the utility level. For example, use of concrete poles to reduce on cutting down wooden poles. We are currently about 22% concrete poles in the country. Other interventions also optimizing on the dams and so forth and so on. So yes, as a country, it's a challenge we have had, but ours is primarily drought, which we are handling in terms of progressively growing the renewable energy sector, taking care of energy efficiency and growing investment by way of opening up the energy sector in the country to attract investors and improve on efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you, USAID and Arizona University for this opportunity. Just to give you a background of Pakistan, Pakistan is among the top 10 climate hit countries in the world, and it is known that it is among the top 10, and since the past 4-5 years we've been hit with very extreme calamities. In 2022, the floods which hit Pakistan impacted approximately 33 million people. and approximately 8 million people were displaced due to the floods. We are still going through the restructuring process. The overall phase is still going through. We're going through it, and Pakistan needs approximately $15 billion just to reconstruct and go back, and rehabilitate those 8 million who have been impacted. As far as Karachi is concerned, which I'm representing right now, Karachi is the third most populous cities of the world, with a population of 25 million people. And it is highly dense as far as the whole landscape is concerned. We have been hit since the past almost 8 years with heat waves, unprecedented and very erratic monsoon floods. And I would, the Secretary General of UN actually coined a term for Pakistan's monsoon, which is called monsoon on steroids. So you can imagine the kind of monsoon we are experiencing. In 2020, Karachi was hit with one of the, I would say, the kind of intensity of monsoons was in the history of Pakistan. We've never seen that kind of intensity. And approximately 37 lives were lost just due to electrocutions. Just to give you a background, in Karachi, approximately 50% population live in temporary settlements with basic amenities like sanitation, drinking water, and solid waste management basically missing. And the Karachi in 2020 came to a standstill for approximately a week. There was water blogging of extreme nature, and our infrastructure actually collapsed. We could not provide power to the city for approximately 5 days. Hence, adaptation strategies had to be very collaborative, because just single-handedly as a utility, we could not do anything unless we worked on creating a sustainable environment and sustainable city. So the first strategy which we actually came up with was to actually create a collaborative platform where all stakeholders will take responsibility and will manage their specific areas. For example, just solid waste management, if the drain systems were clean, could impact climate change to approximately 30%. There was a modeling done, and this is the kind of percentage which such a low-hanging fruit like drainage cleanup can bring. So we worked with the municipality, the city administration, the federal government, the provincial government, and specifically with the communities. We partnered with the communities, and we actually created a platform where we tried to empower the communities and to collaborate with everyone who could pitch in the sustainability of the city. As far as our actions were concerned, we have invested 50% in our network, transmission network. We are rethinking the grid, as it was mentioned. We are actually raising the height of the grid station, raising the height of our substations. We have invested in aerial bundle cabling, because safety has now become one of the biggest issues of Karachi as far as monsoons and our infrastructure is concerned. But just putting up a resilient infrastructure will not actually work until unless we partner with the communities, because people who are living in temporary settlement also have temporary hook connections. And these hook connections are basically illegal connections, which they hook up to the system, and basically it weakens the system. We call it the network encroachment, and these encroachments are not only done by the consumer, the illegal consumers, but also by many other organizations who illegally use our network. And because of this encroachment, obviously the network, the systems are weakened. We actually, I just want to mention here the community aspect. which empowered us basically, and they actually, the strategy which we implemented helped us to safeguard and to bring about a change towards legal connections, and to also bringing that change in the community through climate awareness and through climate communication, that how they can be more prepared for any calamity. How can they be more, capacity building of the overall community actually work for us? So these are some of the strategies which we implemented apart from just investing in the infrastructure, because adaptation and mitigation has to go hand in hand with a very thorough collaborative strategy.
Great, thank you all for sharing. And it's really interesting also to hear the overlap between each of your utilities, both in the challenges that you're facing and in the adaptation strategies. Our next question is, do traditional electric utility business models need to be disrupted to adapt to climate change more quickly and effectively? If yes, how so? If no, why? Anyone's welcome to answer.
I could offer an opinion on this, and it might seem a little bit biased, and it's not meant to be, but I'm not sure that the traditional vertically integrated model necessarily needs to be disrupted to deal with these changes. And in fact, it might be the opposite case, because climate change impacts are not isolated to one piece of the system. And sometimes you need to address these issues at a fully integrated system level. It's not to say you couldn't do it in a different way, but when we're looking, we've recently moved our planning efforts from being sort of very siloed to being completely integrated, an integrated system planning effort. And so when we're looking at climate risk and adaptation, it's important for us to look not only at an individual asset level, but also at the entire system level. So what you might do to sort of create a more resilient asset might not be the overall best thing to do from a system perspective. And I think the traditional model we have supports a broader thinking. And what I will say is having the integrated systems planning model that pulls together generation, transmission, distribution, and customer programs and tries to solve for all these variables at once is really aided by this coordinated effort that we're doing, and also the work that we're doing to downscale the global climate models and to use those consistently across these different planning areas, which can be, I think, very, very helpful. If you split up the system into a lot of pieces, you might not have that same coordination that we have in the traditional model. So not to say that a different model wouldn't work, but just saying that I don't know that you need a different one to adapt.
Maybe perhaps the question would be why decentralization or breaking down of the vertical model came into place, because if you look at the history of electric utilities from the 1890s, the times of Thomas Edison, the legislation of the UK in the 1920s, all of them tended to be vertical utilities, largely owned by government, until 1990s, early 90s. The whole movement of the unbundling of utilities came about. So perhaps the question would be why the whole thing came into place, because maybe the challenge has always been governments tend to be very bureaucratic. And sometimes when you want to attract capital and grow fast, improve efficiency, that's how the public sector participation comes in. Of course, it has its own challenges, because also electric utilities, by their very nature, the transmission, distribution, investment, and maintenance costs is also very high. And that's also where government also comes in. But in certain segments, the opening up still has its own advantages, in the sense that you're able to attract more investment. For example, the virtual power plants, where you have an estate feeding from the solar rooftops to the grid. perhaps the little end of the utility where you want to improve on efficiency. So on a case-by-case basis, yes, but as we're putting it, it has its own advantages and disadvantages, because you might still think you want to create efficiency, but you still end up creating more bureaucracy and increasing costs. Thank you.
Yeah, that's.
I will beg to differ. I think, yes, traditional integrated system will work, and we are not trying to disrupt that system. But I think we can, from a country perspective, where energy access is 25% of the population of Pakistan does not have electricity access right now as well, which is approximately 50 million people. We need to actually come up with different solutions for specific areas. I am a big supporter of micro and mini grids, and I think if combined with renewables, it can give a very quick electricity access apart from rooftop solar to many who don't actually have electricity right now as well. And I was actually reading a study being done in US as well, where they are considering disrupting the transmission systems. So I think we need to rethink and reimagine our grid, especially, and obviously with renewables being there, the transmission systems need to be reimagined. That's my 2 bits.
Yes, Sarah, that's a good segue to what I would like to propose here, because disruption is really a word that we've been hearing, but from a global context and the local context. So what I would propose is really, do we need to reimagine the grid? Because one of the areas or fundamental mission of electricity is reliability. But more and more, we are looking at a context or concept of resiliency, as we see more and more frequent extreme events that are happening all over the world. So how do we design a system that will be resilient to these climate events, and also be able to prepare our system for decarbonization of certain industry? So one aspect that I would propose here is there is what we call voluntary disruption, which is, it could be the proactive approach of a company or federal or regional. But there's also involuntary disruption, wherein policies and mandate and also customer will basically drive the changes that needs to happen within that particular utility. I think a robust and coordinated targeted policies will be beneficial to ensure that we're not only adapting to the changes in climate, but we're also reimagining the grid to ensure that all of us are helping in decarbonization.
Great, thank you, everyone. And to Tom's point, I think also in a world where we have more disruption from the traditional utility model, we need to have collaboration that within one organization might be more easily facilitated. But when we have different, for instance, private sector entities taking a part of different aspects of the power system, we need to make sure that there's some form of conduit that brings everybody together. Something that AmpUp program has actually been looking into is innovation hubs as a form to bring together all the actors that are involved in power system planning and coordination, et cetera. Great. Well, for our next question, we have, how do you think developing countries and developed country utilities can learn from each other on this topic? And I would add to that, how do you see developing country and developed country utilities being able to collaborate on climate change adaptation?
I can take on that. So this is a great question because the challenge in climate change is not local; it's global. So there needs to be a global cooperation as well. As Sarah had mentioned, they're experiencing a lot of flooding. But they've been experiencing also challenges on their generation. So what we're doing right now is a symbol of collaboration where we learn from one another. Um, when we look at climate change impact and climate change, I think developing country is way ahead as far as technology is concerned, as far as downscaling, as far as developing a mitigation strategy. I think we can continue to collaborate with developing country in sharing what are effective ways and optimized ways to be able to address this, and what are technology that will really not only help in addressing issues, but we can also understand the challenges that developing countries are experiencing already with these global challenges. I grew up in the Philippines, and what I would like to share to a lot of folks here in the US is that sea level rise is already happening in the country that in the Philippines, especially in my town in the Philippines. And to communicate that is really to address more collectively how we can address these challenges and mitigate this for our future generation.
Thank you, Roderick. And I would say you're also the perfect person to answer this question, given your background in both living and working in the United States and living and working in developing nations, as you shared in the Philippines and in other parts of Southeast Asia. For our next question, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So audience members, if you would like to add questions to the chat, we'll go through those. Our next question is, what customers in your service territory are most vulnerable to climate change impacts on the sector? And can you describe any initiatives that are being taken to address this vulnerability or steps that can be taken?
Well,
And maybe,
certainly.
oh, go ahead.
Oh,
please.
certainly happy to provide a bit of an SRP overview on this. When we look at the most vulnerable customers, tends to be low income, those with medical challenges, those living in older homes or perhaps mobile homes with poor insulation and sometimes non-functioning cooling systems. And I'd also note, we're talking about global climate change, but there's a bit of a second forcing factor that we experience here, which is the urban heat island effect, which can be really challenging for some of the very urbanized areas, creating higher overnight temperatures and just that lack of relief happening that you might otherwise get. So when we're thinking about the customer vulnerability, we have to throw both of those factors together. In terms of initiatives, actually in preparing for this webinar, I went and looked at our inventory of things, and we actually have about 15 distinct actions and initiatives that we're taking. And I won't go through all of those, but in terms of categories, we have partnerships with community groups, many forms of financial assistance, energy efficiency rebates, free shade trees, and participate in a regional partnership called the Heat Relief Network. So we're trying everything we can do to identify customers in crisis and to provide all the assistance that we can to help them through those very difficult times. But we also know that we can't do that by ourselves, and we really need to partner with communities and community organizations that are closer to those customers and very aware of their challenges and the solutions that will be most beneficial to them.
For us, we have a number of ways we take care of the most vulnerable of our customers. Being a developed country, we have a big part of our population living below the poverty line. What we have done as a country is like 6.3 million of our customers, that's about 70% the low income customers. And we have done what we call cross subsidy in the tariff structure, whereby we have 3 bands of domestic tariff. The low consumption, that is about 0 to 30 units, are charged very cheaply. In the middle band, the money goes on increasing the tariff, and the high end of domestic customers, as the richer people in the society. So they end up cross-subsidizing the more poorer members of the society. And besides that, also we have other initiatives like what we call off-grid solutions. We still have parts of the country that do not have grid. So what the government has done is through our rural electrification agency, the government funds mini grids, that is primarily solar and wind in the far-flung areas of the country to ensure that they are not disadvantaged in terms of the energy access. The other area I would mention is the government also 3 years ago funded a program to distribute energy efficient bulbs to the low-end customers. We distributed about 4.3 million bulbs per household, and that in itself helped us to shave about 60 megawatts from the peak demand. Of course, as we help them with the tariff, we also look at the issue of energy efficiency. And of course, among other ways of helping the low end of the community. So yes, it's a challenge that we address in a number of ways. Thank you.
Well, as far as Karachi is concerned, as I told you earlier, approximately 50% of the population lives in temporary settlements with minimum civil amenities given to them. So we have identified approximately 10 accident-prone areas where the electrocutions rate were really high, both infrastructure-related electrocution and inside home related electrocutions as well. And for us, it was important because the victims of those electrocutions are mostly children and women. And we really wanted to create a bridge and reach out to the women of the community. And because of certain cultural limitations, women usually don't come out and participate in a specific decision or a specific capacity building effort. So we wanted to reach out to the women of the community and make it a proper, the overall initiative. We wanted that climate equity and inclusiveness should be there, and women of the community should actually bear the flag of converting their communities to safer communities. Hence, we launched a program by the name of Roshni Bajis, which is, if we translate it, these are the light bearers of electricity, basically. And what we did, we actually took women from the community, trained them in various aspects of how capacity can be built, how one can safeguard their houses, and how they can, push the men of their household to convert from illegal connection to legal connections, because they are the major causes of electrocution and accidents within the houses. And women are basically responsible of creating, safeguarding their houses and to convert to safer lifestyles. So far we have trained women from the communities, and they do a sensitization program through which they have reached to approximately 450,000 women in a span of 18 months. This is a global award-winning program for climate equity. And what it has done is that this program has brought down approximately 45% of inbound and external electrocutions within these communities. So as far as this initiative is concerned, it's a very specific initiative, but it has brought brilliant results for us. And hence, creating that partnership and if we are investing in a specific community in the resilience, I would say we have to have a very inclusive design, a strategy where everyone takes ownership and safeguard their internal and external communities.
Yeah, in California, we have a diverse location. So in terms of vulnerability, As far as our adaptation assessment is concerned, we have found out by 2050, as far as the trajectory of this climate impact, some of our customers will be vulnerable to sea level rise. It will affect our electrical system on those areas that are residing on our coastal area. Those that are living in a high mountainous area or forested area, they will be more vulnerable to wildfire. So these are vulnerabilities that we are seeing, and those on the inland area in the California region, they will be more vulnerable to extreme heat. So these are elements that will have some implication to our electrical system that affects our customer. And I would say as well that more recently we're experiencing a historic atmospheric river, which also potentially impact cascading event, which is causing a lot of landslide on burn areas that had happened in the region in the past few years. So what are we doing? So I think it's important for us to mention that it is a partnership. It is a collaboration with all our stakeholders. It's a collaboration with scientific community and academic community to understand more on this from a risk-informed based decision making. And it's also important for us to again ramp up our pathway 2045, where is this a strategy for our decarbonization.
Great, thank you, everyone. And especially Zara, your project is truly inspiring. And actually, Arizona State University, we're a part of a similar initiative in the earlier stages in Uganda, where they have very similar issues with electrocution, particularly in the rainy season when the stronger winds are sweeping down these informal connections. So I think this is something to follow up on after the webinar to learn more about your own experiences. Well, great. Our next question is, how do you incorporate uncertainty about what climate change will look like for your specific geography into your planning? So we're all familiar that there's different climate change RCP scenarios. So which do you choose? How do you work with that form of uncertainty into your planning?
Yeah, I love that question. And the interesting thing, like you said, there are a number of different scenarios and there's a lot of uncertainty, but I think the important thing is to say that, uncertainty doesn't mean no information, and it doesn't mean that you don't have anything to act on. And so really it's a very much a scenario planning effort to identify the vulnerabilities in your system. One of the great challenges, of course, is that the global climate models are not very granular in terms of geography or time. And so we have to do a lot of work with researchers to downscale the global climate models to our specific geography. And then going through that, we create scenarios to identify where are the vulnerabilities in our system. And then we have to kind of go through and prioritize, the investments in making the system more resilient against these different possibilities of the future, recognizing that we don't know exactly how it's going to be, but we can identify the biggest pain points and be proactive in advance of some of the real challenges arising for us.
Yeah, with SCE, how do you address uncertainty? I agree with Tom. There's a lot of uncertainty when you downscale global model to a local model. So what we've been doing is really more on risk-informed decision making. We look at all the hazards to understand our exposure, sensitivity of our system and assets, and also figure out our adaptive capacity. By only looking at all those particular methodology, then you'll be able to understand where's the most vulnerable area or system that you are operating. So one area too that is very helpful is even understanding the current performance of your system with respect to current standard. And you'll find out that there's already a lot of work that we need to do in making sure that our system meets a standard-based approach rather than projecting and using projected-based approach or probabilistic approach related to climate information.
Great, thank you, everyone. And Tom, I especially appreciate what you mentioned about uncertainty does not mean no information, as well as what you reiterated, Roderick. So we can still make decisions even if we don't have all of the information, which I would say is probably a majority of the decisions we do make from day to day, especially the bigger ones. The next question we have is, what can others learn from the experiences or even mistakes of your utilities in climate change adaptation? And I'd like to start this off with Mutigi, who previously mentioned that especially the experiences of Kenya, there's a lot to learn for other sub-Saharan African countries in the Kenyan climate change adaptation journey of the power sector.
Thank you. Yes, there are many lessons we can learn from each other. And from Kenya in particular, one of the lessons is looking at ways of harnessing renewable energy potential within the country. Because what we realized is when the water levels, the rains started disappearing, we realized that we had to move fast. So using the available data in terms of wind, solar, and geothermal, we moved and looked at ways of opening up the investment very fast. Of course, we have our own challenges, and one of them, for example, is the structure of how we onboard the independent power producers in terms of the tariff structure. When I look across the developed countries, we have what we call auction model. For example, month-ahead auction model, so that all the people doing generation are able to bid for the following month, and the utility gets the best prices. And of course, also the design of some of our projects in terms of not having, for example, battery storage and advanced weather systems has also been a challenge in terms of operating our systems. But that notwithstanding, we have done a lot of strides. As I mentioned earlier, we are the largest producer of geothermal energy in Africa, and number 7 in the world. And it's something that we are looking at investing heavily. We have grown, for example, solar from 0% in the grid 5 years ago to about 3%. Wind came from 0 3 years ago to about 17% currently, which is a good progress. Maybe what we need to learn from each other is also benchmarking from some of the best practices. I see in other utilities things like virtual power plants, virtual lines, and advanced analytics in terms of data, so that we're able to make our systems a bit more efficient as opposed to where we are currently. So yes, there's a lot to benchmark and a lot to learn. And the good thing is even the solutions from other utilities, the best way to learn from them is to customize for local markets, because some things working, say, for example, in the United States may not work copy-paste in, say, Africa. You need to tailor a few things here and there. But there are a lot we can learn from each other in this regard, because climate change is a challenge for everyone, whether it is Africa, Asia, or Americas, whether it is the flooding, the depressed rains, or tornadoes, and all these other challenges which we all have to deal with. But in terms of Africa, we are, as a country, we are a very good model. We have access rate to the grid of about 80%, and the 8th in Africa, behind a few other countries. And our push is by 2030 will be about 95 to 100% access rate. And we want to make renewable almost 100%, so that even as we shift to electric mobility, time of use tariff, which we have already started in the coming month of April, we'll have a cleaner system that we can be able to use as an example. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Oh, Roderick, was there something you wanted to share?
Yeah, a great lesson, I think, and can be applicable to all, is that we're seeing that we don't have the luxury anymore to wait and see the consequences and impact of climate change, specifically here in California with wildfire. The time for action is now. and we're seeing that and we're implementing that. But what we have learned as well is in investing in adaptation today with an eye toward solving tomorrow's issues, planning for tomorrow's needs, and partnering among communities, government, and industry to achieve the best outcome for our society is needed. So this is a collaborative effort. There's a lot of education that we need to do as a utility company, and to be able to partner with different stakeholders to be able to optimize mitigation solutions that will impact not only the customer that we serve, but all the infrastructure within our service territory.
Great, thank you. And I think we have time for one last question. So this is a question for everyone. What do you want the audience to take away from today's discussion on this topic? I see some possible sides. I mean, these are big challenges we're facing. Oh, Sarah, did you want to start us off?
Yeah, so I think the takeaway should be that how climate change is a global issue. It's not related to one region, one country, and we are all facing that challenge. How intense it is for different regions varies, but I think we are all going through similar challenges. Energy mix, adaptation strategies, mitigation strategies. I think we can all learn from each other. And this platform of learning and sharing knowledge, I think this is the way to go forward as well. Because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If the developed country has already implemented specific strategies, developing countries can just learn through those strategies and maybe just implement them. So I think sharing and having a constant learning, a platform is very encouraging. It's going to help globally everyone to make smarter decisions. That should be the takeaway. It is for me at least. Thanks.
Thank you. Climate change is an evolving challenge for all countries, all economies, and more importantly, all power utilities. And one of the lessons from Kenya, for example, is a proper legislation, proper regulations from government, a lot of government investment in terms of the climate resilience, in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of looking for solutions, whether it is opening up this energy sector on a case-by-case basis, or it is rural electrification programs, investment in energy efficiency systems and research, climate resilient grid, renewable energy technologies, best practices. There's a lot to be done, and from my perspective, the lesson is we can all learn from each other. Developed countries have done a lot, and of course, there's a lot of investment required across board. So collaborations in terms of research and innovation will become very important. It's also very important to look at each country on a case-by-case basis in terms of the available resources. For example, our neighbors here, Ethiopia and DRC Congo, have a lot of water resources which they can harness and maybe sell to neighboring countries. Ourselves, we have a lot of geothermal which we can harness and maybe sell to other countries and so forth and so on. A lot of solar, for example, in the Sahara Desert. The same thing maybe in the Americas, and a lot of water in South America. This is like Brazil. So there's a lot that we can learn from each other, and what it requires is a very open mind in terms of government, especially policymakers and regulators, so that each country and each utility is able to move faster. Because without support from government, energy is still a very regulated commodity in many countries, for the reason that energy is both a socio-economic and a political commodity. So because of the regulation, involvement of government and that support is very important. And as much as we want to bring in a private sector prayers. Thank you.
I will just agree with all that has been said. And, you know, I think the only other thing I'd say is it's just really important that we continue to look at this transition and climate change through the eyes of our customers and don't take our eye off the ball there.
Roderick, any final thoughts?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So, as we do our report here in California, I think be encouraging the community, encouraging each to be
Oh, sorry, there was a little bit of audio issues or connectivity issues, but I think we got that. You were reiterating the importance of community involvement. So to close us off today, thank you everybody for attending today's webinar. We hope you can take away from this webinar lessons for implementing climate change adaptation of power systems in your own region. You'll be able to find resources the speakers have shared on climate change adaptation for each of their utilities on the USEA website. And please stay in touch for further webinars hosted by USEA and the AmpUp program. With that, that concludes our webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.